So we need to think, I think, in terms of probiotics, antibiotics, prebiotics. We talk about the use of probiotics in the book as medical applications. There are some applications that really do seem to work. We need to sort of rethink the application and over-application of antibiotics in both agriculture and medicine. Use them when we need them, but maybe not when we don't. But there's also the issue of prebiotics, a term that I hadn't heard about when we started doing the research for this book, but which actually now has totally changed the way that Ann and I eat. What are prebiotics? Well, it's basically the stuff that provides the fiber to your colon. It's the stuff that basically, it's like this stuff. It's plant matter. It's green stuff. It's cellulose and fiber-rich material. It's basically eating for your microbiome, for the microbiome in your gut, because that's where most of your microbiome is. They like plant matter. So that means greens and fiber-rich vegetables and fruits are essentially, the thing we should be ensuring we eat enough of to feed them. We're not necessarily eating that for us. We're eating it to feed them so they can work with us. We're feeding our microbial partners. What would this look like on your plate? Well, essentially eating a lot of vegetables and fruits, leafy greens, cruciferous vegetables. Fill your plate at least half full with those kind of things. And unprocessed whole grains would be the other key. Some source of protein. Suit yourself in terms of how you want to find it, but the key thing here is not to actually have that be the bulk of your diet. You want to essentially have that to be a much smaller share of the diet than is typical in the Western diet, because you want a lot more of that stuff on that green side of the plate. And why does this matter? How would this work? Well, if you kind of compare the typical Western diet to what we like to call the inner garden diet, the sort of that plate that we just showed, there's some real differences. If you think down through the system of the digestive tract, what's happening and coming out, those black arrows are essentially showing you the relative amounts of things coming from those different colored boxes. In the Western diet, we get a lot of simple carbohydrates. That's those refined grains, simple sugars, things that are absorbed in your small intestine, go straight into your bloodstream, cause insulin problems, all kinds of issues I think we'll hear a lot more about, or you'll hear a lot more about later this week. You also get very few of the medicinal microbial metabolites in the Western diet. Why? If you don't have enough fiber going down into your colon, you're not feeding the microbiome in there that would then be producing those. In the inner garden diet, you want to eat carbohydrates, and some simple carbohydrates are fine, but you want to make sure you're basically eating in a way that produces enough of the medicinal microbial metabolites in your colon to actually sustain and foster your own health. And what are those harmful microbial metabolites in the middle? Well, we heard again, I think last night, some allusion to the breakdown of proteins producing a lot in terms of sulfur and nitrogen-rich compounds, and that's true. The key is that you do need sulfur and nitrogen, though, for your own health. You just don't need as much as we tend to eat. And so you want to outweigh the things that may be harmful metabolites from the breakdown and processing of your food with things that are helpful ones. In other words, eat a plant-rich diet. But plants have a diet, too. And this microbial perspective on health and nutrition relates to that as well. If you look at what plants produce themselves and integrate into their bodies, sort of take that last graph and turn it sort of back the other way around, what happens in terms of sort of the typical Western fertilizer diet, in terms of where we're basically feeding the plants as much nitrogen and phosphorus as they can possibly take up, and they get a lot of macronutrients. They're getting the basic things they need to build their bodies, but what they don't get is that the microbial life in the soil isn't working as hard to actually bring them micronutrients, to actually generate the phytochemicals that they need to defend pathogens. And so you're getting fewer of the beneficial microbial metabolites and fewer of the micronutrients. And so if you have a soil life diet where essentially the plants are relying more on the microbial processes and breakdown of organic matter and the recycling of material within the soil to generate their own bodies and nutrition, you get more of the beneficial compounds, these phytochemicals, you get more micronutrients, you get perhaps some less macronutrients, and there's all kinds of studies all over the place in terms of what this may do to crop yields. But the difference in terms of microbial life, in terms of what's actually making it into plants, is, I think, in principle at least, fairly clear. And soil health, in the end, does translate into our own health. If we look at there's a UK Ministry of Health study back that looked at mineral depletion in vegetables from 1940 to 1991. They found, across the board decreases in copper, calcium, iron, magnesium, potassium, different mineral elements, and there's a lot of reasons that people offer for this. Different crop varieties, intensive fertilization, but the key thing, it may be that this changes in microbial life in the soil have played a role in that as well. The key thing, though, is their quote there, deficiencies in plants translate through to deficiencies in animals. A piece of steak now contains only half the amount of iron it would have contained 50 years ago. You make the same kind of statements about vegetables in terms of their mineral contents, things, and we need micronutrients. We don't need a lot of them. That's why they're called micronutrients. But they are actually very critical to maintaining our own health. And it turns out that microbial life in the soil is one of the vectors through which that stuff gets into us. So in other words, what I've been trying to get across is that understanding the hidden half of nature, the microbial world, the world below our feet and the world too small to see, is actually unveiling a new view of nature and ourselves. We're starting to think about ourselves in a different way because of these microbial partnerships that actually turn out to be essential to maintaining our own health. What does it mean? Well, frankly, we need to cultivate our soil, both inner and outer, the soil in the garden and the soil in our gut, with organic matter. We have to feed the microbes that serve beneficial purposes towards our own health or the health of our crops. And how would we do this? Well, again, you've got a geologist and a biologist talking to you about this, so we're not going to give you specific details on specific things, but in the broad principle, we need to use the mind of an ecologist with the care of a gardener and the skill of a doctor to actually try and bring together our understanding of how to foster the beneficial life both within the soil and within ourselves, because they really have been our secret silent partners for most of our evolutionary history. And I'll leave you there. I actually sent the page proofs of the book off the day before I got on the plane to come here, so you guys are the beta testers. You're hearing this first. But I obviously encourage you to check the book out. It'll be out in the fall. Thank you. And I guess we have time for a question or two, but I'll be glad to entertain most questions afterwards out there when I get a chance to catch my breath.
I live in a community here in Florida that I moved from Edmonds, Washington to the community. And they're very restrictive about what we're allowed to do with our yards. And when we first moved in, we started composting. They made us tear out our compost pile and throw away the compost drum. We have earthworms, but we had to put up a 6-foot fence in order to keep our neighbors from seeing that we have earthworms. We planted papayas along the back fence, but they aren't on the list that's approved in the town, so they made us tear out the papayas. We put sweet potatoes or wild yams in our front garden, and they made us tear out our yams. The upshot
you should plant in the backyard.
Well, we would, but it's the shady part. And our neighbor's tree covers the backyard, so it's very difficult to plant things that will grow well in the backyard. And then to top it off, they put a $20,000 fine on us for planting the wrong kinds of vegetables and basically being the leaders of the Rebel Alliance in the town. So my suggestion is that this video that we're creating here be shown to the homeowners associations all over the country so that they can see that some of us who are trying to change the urban environment into permaculture are not really villains, but are in fact part of the solution instead of part of the problem. Yeah,
I would agree very much with that. If we look at how we shape our own habitat, which is for most of humanity, it's mostly the urban environments now. More than half of us live in urban environments. We should be thinking about restoring the soil in urban environments, not just to make gardens, but in terms of connections to food. The part I didn't talk about in the talk today is how much food Ann has been able to grow in her vegetable beds in our yard at different times. There's been times when, during the summer, we mostly are eating out of there. And it's as close as you can get to fresh if it's coming right out of the backyard. And I don't understand was it Edmonds, was it?
No, that's here in Celebration.
Oh, that's here. Oh, yeah. I just don't get that. I just don't get it. I mean, that's... Yes?
I just want to thank you for this fascinating... I'm just amazed by these invisible to the human eye microbes, and they play a role in everything, in the source of life, the wisdom of nature. It's just amazing to me. And also it just brings to light that we as humans, our perspective is just to control and ultimately destroy all this wisdom, and it just points it out that we need to learn from the wisdom of nature, natural processes.
One of the things I've been most interested in with writing this book was just how different the perspective that we have today, at the leading edge of science, at the frontiers of both agriculture and medicine, the perspective that we have today on microbial life is different than we had 20, 30 years ago. That's truly a revolution in thought. It hasn't played out yet, and I would argue to you that we've got opportunities to both really mess things up and to really make things better. And the challenge is going to be to try and think of how to develop methods and techniques to use this new perspective and understanding for the better. Because there's also the law of unintended consequences. We have a long track record of trying to do what we think is the right thing and then going, oops, when something goes sideways on us. That'll happen. But I think the important part is to essentially keep exploring and trying to make things better. And I'm working on a new book now looking at the role of soil restoration in agriculture. I think we can actually reform. It is possible to reform agriculture and feed the world this century in ways that are constructive. And the important thing is for people to be thinking with the current best available science to try and guide practices in a constructive direction. Anyway, I'll be glad to entertain other questions out in the lobby. Thank you very much.